All right. Well, welcome everybody to Roundabout Books event with Francis Pring-Mill on the In Harmony with the Tao. And my name is Julie. I'm the events manager. So if you haven't been to an event at the store recently, maybe you haven't met me, hi. We're hoping to get live events back in the store soon, but we're going to continue with Zoom events to keep everyone safe for now. So please check our event calendar. We have some great events scheduled for November, and we're going to continue to events into December because we can keep them virtual. So I wanted to remind everyone the store is open right now, Monday through Friday, or sorry, every day, Monday through Sunday, 10 to 5. We have the book in stock right now. So if you're wanting to get a copy, you didn't get one before being able to come tonight, or you're watching this later, please come in and get a copy of the book from us. So we're really excited to have this event tonight. Not only because our author is joining us from Canada, and that's amazing, and that's one of the beautiful things about this virtual space right now, but also we've been trying to have this event for almost a year.
That's right. I was going to mention that.
When Francis first came into the store last year, he was traveling through the area, came in, told us about the book, and we planned an event for when he would be visiting us again. And then unfortunately, with COVID, we have rescheduled, etc. And now we have decided to embrace the virtual space so that we can finally talk about this very cool book. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about our author. I'm not going to go through your whole bio, but what I did really want to highlight on here. So Francis Pring-Mill has a master's degree and a doctorate from the University of Oxford, where he also won a postgraduate scholarship which funded 3 years of doctoral research. And then I love this. His writing is characterized by success at analyzing, simplifying, and presenting ideas to make them easier to understand and apply. In this book, he brings the same skills to a new subject. So with that, I think I will turn it over to you to maybe illuminate how your background helped you bring in this book and what we're going to do tonight.
Okay, thank you, Julie. That's great. Like you say, it's interesting to note we've been trying to pull this event off for quite a while. In fact, today is October 29, which I notice is exactly 5 months after May 29, which when I was scheduled to do this in person at Roundabout Books and Bend. But instead, we can do it this way, which is just fine. And thank you all for being here this evening. That's really great. So my name is Francis Pring-Mill, and my book is called In Harmony with the Tao, Guided Journey into the Tao Te Ching. From time to time, we've likely all asked ourselves the question, is there a way to live our lives in harmony with the world around us? The Tao Te Ching says yes. Tao Te Ching is a Chinese text written over 2,500 years ago. Roughly translated, Tao means way or path. De means inner strength or integrity. And integrity is an important word because it implies oneness or wholeness. And Ching means great book or classic. So Tao Te Ching means something like the great book of the way of integrity. It consists of 81 brief chapters written by a man named Lao Tzu. And it's been a source of inspiration for centuries. You've likely heard quotes from it, even if you didn't know where they came from. For example, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. In fact, reading the Tao Te Ching is like taking a journey up a mountain with awesome views and insights along the way. Some parts of the journey are easygoing, but in other parts, the path becomes windy and steep as the text gets dense and cryptic. Some parts even feel like they take you to a cliff edge and leave you hanging. The text contradicts itself. I've been fascinated by the Tao Te Ching ever since being a teenager and coming across a copy of it in a secondhand bookstore on a lunch break from high school. I found I kept returning to it on and off over the years. And I always promised myself that one day I'd take the time to explore why the text resonated so deeply with me. So now, obviously many decades later since high school, I've returned to this source of inspiration, and my book, In Harmony with the Tao, is the result. And what I've done is focus not so much on what's on the lines as on what's between them. And when you do this, you find there are themes or, well, common threads which weave through all 81 chapters. And when you follow the threads, they take you on a path of least resistance up the mountain to the finest views. So my book contains the complete text of the Tao Te Ching in English, Stephen Mitchell's version, and each chapter is followed by what I call a guided journey into what's going on between the lines. So I thought what I'd do this evening is share a few chapters with you to show you what I mean, and hopefully also show you what an amazing book the Tao Te Ching is. So what I'll do is read a couple of chapters. I'll read the Tao Te Ching chapter first. The chapters are quite short, and for those of you who've looked into the book or who are familiar with the Tao Te Ching, you'll know that some of them are only a couple of paragraphs. And then I'll follow the Lao Tzu's words with my guided journey. Because this is a virtual event, I found that reading the book off my screen gives me better lighting. So it's going to appear that I'm looking directly at you, but that doesn't mean I've memorized my entire book. So I thought I'd just say that because it might otherwise look a little strange. The other thing is, talking with Julie ahead of time, we thought it might be interesting for me to read a couple of chapters. Like I say, they're quite short, and then take any questions that you might have. And I think Julie's going to catch them in the chat. You can make a chat and put a question that way if you want. And then after a couple of chapters, we could take any questions about the ideas or content in those chapters. And then I can read a couple more. And then maybe we can take any more general questions like, how did I come to write this book at the end? So does that sound reasonable? I know you're not, I know Julie's muted you all, so you can't talk, but I'll assume the answer to that is yes. So what I'm going to do is, like I say, read a chapter or two and show you what I mean. So let me just get my version on the screen. Okay, so a chapter I thought a good place to start with is about how our desire to know things tends to get in the way of living in the present moment. So this happens to be chapter 48. So what I'm going to do is start with Lao Tzu's words and then switch to the guided journey like I described. So here's Lao Tzu, 2,500 years ago. Here he goes. In the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less do you need to force things, until finally you arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. True mastery can be gained by letting things go their own way. It can't be gained by interfering. So that's Lao Tzu. Knowledge often gets in the way. The pursuit of knowledge works like this. The human mind seeks to understand and believes the way to do so is to analyze what's out there with thought. This is a big undertaking because there's a lot out there. We start by identifying and naming things, and then build relationships between them to connect them all together again into a structure that we call knowledge. There's nothing wrong with this. Knowledge can be very useful. Thoughts about things can be tested and proved to be true or false. Science works by by accepting as solid building blocks only the hypotheses that have withstood test to disprove them. It's all very organized with rules, laws, and principles. And so the structure of knowledge grows and grows. Quote, in the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. Is this a useful exercise? Sure it is. Along the way, we can use our knowledge to predict and control certain aspects of our natural world. We can dam rivers and create hydroelectricity. We can repair damage to the human body and prevent illness. And we can send a man to the moon, listen to the stars with radio telescopes. All very impressive. Will we ever know all there is to be known? No, we won't. Will we keep pursuing knowledge as long as our inquiring minds are active? Yes, we will. After all, it's a big undertaking. Talk to any scientist. Before we can push back the frontiers of knowledge, we have to study what's already known to prove we're on the frontier. Only then can we boldly go where no man has gone before. It's a noble pursuit, but it's a pursuit nonetheless, and one without an end. Contrast this with the practice of the Tao. There is no pursuit. There is no end. If you like the image of an end, then the end is the beginning. If you like the image of a journey, then you arrive without leaving. But the mind has a tough time digesting these phrases because when you think about them, they don't make sense. They aren't solid building blocks that can be incorporated into the structure of knowledge. But what if they're true nonetheless? To practice the Tao is to be aware and accept what is, and to dwell in harmony with it. Oddly enough, this doesn't call for an understanding of the structure of knowledge, nor does it call for you to do any thing. At the end of the day, things don't really need you to help them go their own way. They can get there just fine without you. Not to be unkind, but your attempts to help them along are mostly done with fulfilling your desire as a mind, and thus amount to, quote, interfering. So how do you achieve this awareness? Not with the machinery of thought. If anything, the practice of the Tao calls for methodically removing the thoughts that block your awareness. Quote, in the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Another block falls away. Less and less do you need to force things into the structure of pre-existing knowledge. But isn't this just another endless pursuit? No, because you arrive the moment you realize there is no thing that you need to do. Everything is perfect, just the way it is. Does this mean you don't matter? That you can't make a difference? You now do nothing? Absolutely not. If you like, think of the universe as music all around you. Your job is to discover your song and sing it in harmony. Singing is not doing nothing, nor is it interfering. It is singing. Being part of the Tao is about being. It's not about doing things. Quote, when nothing is done, nothing is left undone. Being, not doing. This is true mastery. How often we believe that more knowledge is the answer to everything. The way to understand something is to analyze it, study the so-called constituent parts, and then try to understand the world in terms of them. And there's nothing wrong with this. Often it works. As we've seen, the pursuit of knowledge has many useful applications. The trouble starts when we confuse what we know with everything there is, and believe knowledge alone should guide all our actions. You ever simply let things go and been surprised at how well they worked out? Perhaps you've done this for things you felt didn't matter too much, but what about bigger things? What if you were to act from awareness rather than what we call knowledge? This is an unnerving thought, isn't it? But the key word is thought. What if, in some cases, thought and knowledge were not the solution, but part of the problem? Perhaps even the whole problem. This chapter reminds us that living the Tao is a practice, not a pursuit, and it involves letting go of what we think we know. When we trust ourselves to the Tao, we act from beyond thought and knowledge. And when we do, we find that nothing needs to be forced. No interfering is needed. In fact, we don't need to do anything in particular. Our actions simply become part of the flow. And so we become part of the flow. So there's a theme running through this chapter, which is that knowledge works by, sorry, just getting the screen back. Knowledge works by separating things into parts. That's the theme. And we can get very distracted doing this. In fact, when you look at the Tao Te Ching as a whole, there are a number of these themes, or what I call common threads, that weave through all the chapters. Another one is what I call desire springs from the self. Let's take a look at that one. What I mean by that is, when we pursue knowledge by separating things and naming the parts, first thing we distinguish is ourselves. Then we desire things for ourselves. Then we go on to act with deliberate intent to fulfill our desires. And we have expectations as to the results of our actions. Basically, the self is always distracting us from what's present by moving us into a future that it desires, and the expectations, and sometimes fears, that go with it. Or sometimes it moves us into the past and regret about something that didn't meet a desire in the past. The future, the past, anywhere at the present moment. On top of this, we often desire others to think well of us. This is why actions which spring from the self, as opposed to being centered in the Tao, tend to bring what the Tao Te Ching calls confusion and sorrow. So let me read a chapter that illustrates this theme about how desire springs from the self and how the self creates expectations. So this is going to be chapter 10. So I'll do the same, Lao Tzu first, and then let's see what goes on between the lines, and then let's look at a couple of questions, if any have come up. So here's Lao Tzu with chapter 10, and about desire. Can you coax your mind from its wandering and keep to the original oneness? Can you let your body become supple as a newborn child's? Can you cleanse your inner vision until you see nothing but the light? Can you love people and lead them without imposing your will? Can you deal with the most vital matters by letting events take their course? Can you step back from your own mind and thus understand all things? Giving birth and nourishing, having without possessing, acting with no expectations, leading and not trying to control. This is the supreme virtue. Unchecked, our self will run the show. Bottom line of this chapter is you'll never understand the Tao with your mind. The only way is to, quote, step back from your own mind and thus understand all things. This is, of course, quite a blow to the machinery of thought of which we're generally so proud. First Spot spells out this idea in more detail by referring to 5 aspects of daily living: our mind, our body, our inner vision, loving people, and dealing with vital matters. These are pretty down-to-earth topics, and a reminder that these writings are essentially a practical guide, not a theoretical treatise. The common theme is self-discipline. Keeping yourself aligned with the Tao requires constant awareness. Unchecked, your mind will wander. You need to coax it back to the original oneness. Unchecked, your body will become rigid. You need to let it return to its natural state, supple as a newborn child's. Unchecked, your inner vision will become cloudy and dark with thoughts. You need to cleanse it until you see nothing but the light of emptiness. Otherwise, you'll remain trapped in your thoughts, a prisoner of your desire to have things be a certain way, and you'll never dwell in the freedom of living in the Tao. Let's continue. Unchecked, your actions with other people will tend to be attempts to impose your will on them. You need to love them and lead them without doing this. Unchecked in daily affairs, you'll similarly try to impose your will. You need to let events take their course. Unchecked, you will dwell inside your own mind. If you do, you'll never understand all things. You'll always remain separate from the Tao and not part of the original oneness. What is it then to dwell in the Tao? What does it look like? Note that what follows is a description of simply being. None of it describes a goal. or an end state or a destination. For example, it's not succeeding in securing possessions. It is simply having. It is not fulfilling a particular predetermined expectation. It is simply acting. It is not having finally got others under your control. It is simply leading in whatever way is called for as events take their course. It is giving birth and nourishing. This is the supreme virtue. This is hard stuff. Why? I think it's because our society admires those who strive for and achieve goals. Having lots of people under your control from your spot at the top of an organizational hierarchy is seen as the pinnacle of professional achievement. What's more, our society typically values material possessions as external indicators of success. Small wonder then that we tend to strive, control, and possess. Yet each one of these activities reinforces the separateness of where we are from where we want to be. What's more, we will never get there because we'll never have enough. We'll remain trapped in the rat race, constantly striving for more. In the Tao, there is no there to get to. We are already there. There is no striving to be done, no possessions to be secured, no control over others to be exerted, no more to be had. But does this mean we do nothing? Without goals, are our lives pointless? Absolutely not. The point is not to do things dictated by the machinery of thought or the desires of our self-image. It is to act without attachment to an expected result, without seeking to control, to act with detachment, if you like, but we still care, even as we let events take their course. We simply act with compassion and let go. To do this is to dwell in the Tao. When we dwell in the Tao, then harmony results and all manner of conflict and difficulty disappear. Is this easy? No. Is it worth it? Yes. How often we let our minds take us wherever they want to go. Our inner vision becomes full of whatever our minds choose to think about, typically desires and expectations of one sort or another. Whatever they are, you can be sure they're not part of the original oneness. And then the trouble starts, because as soon as the thoughts are there, we start to act on them. Our minds insist, how can we achieve our goals without imposing our will? What guarantee will we have if we let events take their course? And so our minds try to run the show and control all the details. You ever simply acted without desiring a particular result? It's not the same as acting thoughtlessly. Rather, it's like acting from beyond thought, as it were. From this place, aware of how events are taking their course, you simply act with compassion and let go, shaping the flow, leading without trying to control. This chapter reminds us that doing so is the supreme virtue. So it's a couple of chapters there, and with some interesting ideas that Lao Tzu kind of puts out for us to chew on and think about. Any thoughts or comments that have come up in looking at what we've glanced at so far?
Yeah, Kat had a question.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm getting a weird, okay. Is there a verse or verses that particularly sing to you?
Sing to me. Oh my goodness. That's a good question. Many of them. I have favorite quotes. We're looking at a couple of chapters that I've got lined up that we can look at. That's got some of those in. I'll give you a preview. One of my favorite quotes is, and I'll probably mention it again later, do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? I can see Kathleen's nodding at this one. Too many thoughts are like mud. A lot of what Lao Tzu does is gently remind us that most of the time we interact with the world through our mind, through what we think about it, through what we want the world to be, or our idea of how things should be happening. And to the degree that they're not, we get stressed out and frustrated, and we try to interfere, to use Lao Tzu's words, or force things into a certain direction. And that's where the confusion and sorrow starts. So if I'd say anything that sings to me, it's probably the simplicity of his words, if I was going to say it in general. And if I had to pick on a few phrases in particular, perhaps I'd pick on that one about having the patience to wait, to let. That's another word he used to use a lot of the time, and allow, rather than come up with your idea of what it should be and form your plan and execute your plan and make things happen the way you have in mind. I'm not sure. Do other people have thoughts around that? It's an interesting question.
Kathleen did have another
Yeah.
question, but it's more about the book as a whole. So I think we should maybe wait
Okay.
until we'll do that one closer to the end. So
Okay.
yeah.
Alrighty. Well, why don't we look at another thread that's one of these ones that weaves all the way through. The threads are kind of cool because when you chase them, they make it a lot easier. Or I should say when you follow them, you don't chase them. And this thread that goes through a lot of chapters is what I call empty your mind to become aware of what is. And what I mean by that is a mind full of anything is closed, not open. A closed mind may be full of knowledge, but it can never simply be aware of what is. What's more, when your mind is full, the Tao Te Ching suggests you block the radiance of the light that's within you. The way to be aware, as opposed to knowledgeable, is to let go of the desire to know. When you empty your mind, you find capability springs from emptiness, and the light shines. So this chapter is going to illustrate this theme of empty your mind to become aware of what is, and how capability springs from emptiness. Here we go. It's actually the very next chapter. It's chapter 11. So here's Lao Tzu again. Let's start with him. Here he goes. We join spokes together in a wheel, but it is the center hole that makes the wagon move. We shape clay into a pot, but it's the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. We hammer wood for a house, but it's the inner space that makes it livable. We work with being, but non-being is what we use. Capability comes from emptiness. We may recall, quote, the Tao is called the Great Mother, empty yet inexhaustible. It gives birth to infinite worlds. That was in chapter 6. This chapter explores this idea of emptiness with 3 metaphors. The capability of the wheel to make the wagon move comes not from the spokes in the wheel, but from the emptiness of the center hole. The capability of the pot to hold whatever we want to put in it comes not from the shaped clay, but from the emptiness inside it. Capability of a house to be fit for living in comes not from the hammered wood, but from the emptiness of the space within. A wheel with no center hole would be useless. So would be a pot that was solid clay. So would be a house that was solid wood. And so it is with us. Our capability lies in being empty, not in being full. Quote, we work with being we use. What is meant by non-being? Non-being is what's there when we let go of our self-image and allow our actions to spring from our true inner self. Unchecked, our self-image will use our actions to inflate itself in the eyes of others. When we're full of our self-image, our true self can never shine through. We're like the solid clay pot, useless. It's in this respect that non-being is emptiness. What exactly is it that we need to be empty of? In a word, desire. If our mind is full of desires, then we see everything in terms of what we want it to be, not in terms of what it is. This chapter builds directly on the last one, where we saw how actions that spring from a mind full of desires will never be in harmony with the Tao. We'll always try to control. We'll try to impose our will. We'll be driven by a desired future, and so we'll fail to live in the present moment. Why is this? It's because the mind abhors what it sees as the vacuum of emptiness. Left unchecked, it'll fill itself with thoughts and desires. It will create imaginary future states in which it's better off because it has more possessions, more money, or more security, or thinks it's held in higher esteem by others. Left unchecked, it'll then direct our actions and use them as a means to an end. Conflict and difficulty will result. Harmony will be lost. Needless to say, we'll not be dwelling in the Tao. So how do we use non-being to dwell in the Tao? How do we check our mind, as it were? The answers lie in the previous chapter. Coax your mind from its wandering. Cleanse your inner vision till you see nothing but the light. Love people and lead them without imposing your will. Deal with the most vital matters by letting events take their course. Act with no expectations, not trying to control. That was chapter 10. This is what it means to be empty. It's from this emptiness that capability springs. How often we act when we're full of ourselves. When we're like this, we're like a solid wheel, a solid clay pot, or a house with no space inside. All we're interested in is how to impose our will, how to get the results we want. Like this, we're useless, at least in terms of living in harmony with the Tao. You ever been frustrated that your best laid plans just don't seem to be working out? The world just won't bend itself to your wishes. Of course, we usually don't see it that way. We don't feel we're imposing our will at all. We simply think we know best. We have everyone's best interests at heart. Or more accurately, we have our idea of everyone's best interests at heart. And the world just doesn't seem to appreciate this fact and fall obediently in line. How frustrating. This chapter reminds us that when we feel like this, we're not listening to the Tao. We're listening to ourself. And the reality is that we become full of whatever we listen to. Listen to ourself and we become full of ourself. Listen to the Tao and we become empty of ourself. It's from this emptiness that capability springs. Only then will our actions be in harmony with the Tao. Our actions will seem effortless. The wagon will roll without friction. The pot will hold whatever we like. The house will be the perfect place to dwell. Another thread, and then let's take some questions that might come up. Another thread is what I call return to the source. Let me just go back. Okay, return to the source. And what I mean by that is, this thread runs through a lot of chapters as well. This one means, this thread is, the Tao is oneness or wholeness, and so it's everywhere. We can think of our thoughts and desires as being at the edge of a circle, and they come and go. This image of a circle comes up a lot in Lao Tzu's words. So if our thoughts and desires at the edge of a circle coming and going, the Tao is at the center, and it's going nowhere. So to reconnect with harmony and light, all we need do is come back from the edge of the circle and return to the center. So this chapter is going to illustrate this theme of return to the source and how returning to the source is serenity. So let me just go there. This is happens to be chapter 16. So here we go, Lao Tzu, and the theme, return to the source. Empty your mind of all thoughts. Where have we heard that before? That's me, that's not Lao Tzu speaking there. He goes, empty your mind of thoughts. Let your heart be at peace. Watch the turmoil of beings, but contemplate their return. Each separate being in the universe returns to the common source. Returning to the source is serenity. If you don't realize the source, you stumble in confusion and sorrow. When you realize where you come from, you naturally become tolerant, disinterested, amused, kind-hearted as a grandmother, dignified as a king. Immersed in the wonder of the Tao, you can deal with whatever life brings you. And when death comes, you're ready. Returning to the source is serenity. Dwelling in the Tao and a mind full of thoughts just don't go together. First line of this chapter makes this idea quite clear. So how do you get the thoughts out of your mind? Well, you don't think them out. Last chapter gave us one way: simply be patient and let them go. Quote, do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? That was chapter 15. What will you see once your mind is clear? You will see the turmoil of beings with much confusion and sorrow caused by people thinking their temporary separateness is all there is. This is what happens when we forget that apparent separateness is an illusion and that reality is unity. When our human lives are over, we go back to the reality we came from. We can't really talk about the afterlife or heaven and hell and judgment, whatever you want to call it, because we don't know what we're talking about. So let's just keep it simple and call it returning to the common source. Leave it at that. We all know our human life is temporary, but if we're not careful, we spend much of our time driven by our thoughts and desires, all of which are based on splitting things up, separating them, naming them, making judgments about which are desirable or not, and pursuing those we think are desirable. No wonder we often, quote, stumble in confusion and sorrow. Why confusion? Because all aspects of separateness pull in the opposite direction of unity. So it's inevitable there'll be confusion sooner or later. Why sorrow? Because desires often go unfulfilled. And when we pin happiness and sorrow on success and failure, then we're bound to get sorrow. And depending on what we pin our happiness on, even happiness can be fleeting, especially if it's based on anything to do with possessions. So what does the master do? He dwells in the Tao by being constantly aware of the big picture. He doesn't pin anything anywhere. The reality is that you came here with nothing. You're going to leave with nothing. All you have in the meantime are your actions and a constant choice that you have to make. Are you going to dwell in the Tao or in the illusion of your thoughts and desires? Are you going to act with compassion, guided by wisdom, let go of expectation? Or are you going to be driven by thought and desire and live in confusion and sorrow? You pick. Quote, returning to the source is serenity. It's where you're headed anyway. So what happens if you live in constant awareness of this? For a start, you don't get attached to temporary distractions. You're disinterested. You may watch the turmoil of beings, but you don't interfere. You remember not to judge, because to judge is to think, split, separate, and compare. The reality is that we're all here living our own temporary lives. Your way is no better than anyone else's. The least you can do is be, quote, tolerant, and at most, amused. Quote, kind-hearted as a grandmother, dignified as a king. These words are a good description. To dwell in the Tao is simply to immerse itself in your wonder. No judging, no thinking, just acting with compassion and letting go. If you live like this, you won't get swept up in the turmoil. You'll be able to deal with whatever life brings you. Death will come sooner or later. Doesn't matter when, because you won't be full of hopes, fears, and regrets. You'll be ready. How often we find ourselves caught up in the turmoil of beings. How often we stumble in confusion and sorrow. Our default way of dealing with the world is to fill our minds with thoughts. If something isn't working out the way we want, we think, why is that? What's going wrong? What do we need to do to fix this? Why doesn't this way or that way work? All these thoughts take us further and further away from the reality of what is. In the words of this chapter, we're not tolerant. We're not disinterested. We're certainly not amused. You have just taken a deep breath and emptied your mind. Just contemplated a situation for what it is, with no vested interest in having reality be your version of what it should be. What happens when we do this? In short, we let go. Our pulse rate drops. Our heart is at peace. We become free to simply listen and respond in whatever way is called for by the natural flow of what's happening around us. This chapter reminds us the experience described above is what it's like when we return to the source, centered in the reality of what is, instead of separated and lost in our own thoughts. This is where serenity lies. So there's another couple of chapters. Any thoughts or comments about the ideas or content of what Lao Tzu is trying to share there?
Yeah, Sarah had a question.
Sarah, hi Sarah.
She said, how does one lead others without imposing your will? As a manager of a team, I'd love to hear specific examples of this. It sounds like a wonderful approach.
What a good question. Yes. There's a great chapter about leadership. I'll put my finger on it in a minute, but you may know it if you're familiar with Tao Te Ching, where he talks about the best leader is invisible. He leads, as it were, without imposing his will, with the result that I should find the actual words. Let me get them if I can. And then when people do this, they say, "Amazing, we did it all by ourselves." I don't know if you know that quote. Some of you are familiar with the Tao Te Ching, are familiar with that quote. I'll find it in a moment. So to answer Sarah's question, it's not all about you as leader. It's about what's the vision that we're trying to accomplish here, and maybe listening to what each person can bring to accomplishing that, and having the team contribute whatever each person contributes best towards that end. Obviously, the goal needs to be defined, but maybe the leader's goal, the leader's role is to identify the vision, and as if you like, have people understand that and buy into it, and then back off and let people bring to that whatever's within them that contributes best to the goal. And that's a more effective way to lead, Lao Tzu suggests, than being out in front or on the top of your command and control hierarchy saying, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And we're going to do it my way. And it's starting now. So in a way, it's at the same time putting a vision out there, but at the same time backing off. I'll find that leadership chapter in a moment. I can see Kathleen's looking for it, maybe. Perhaps she's found it. Let me just see if I can hit on it in a moment, because it's a great one. Leadership. Oh, there we go. Chapter 17. It's chapter 17 if you want to look later. Yeah, I'll let you take a look at that. That's part of the answer, I think, to that question. Yeah, when the master governs, the people are hardly aware that he exists. And at the end, he says, the master doesn't talk, he acts. When his work is done, the people say, amazing, we did it all by ourselves. So I think that kind of touches a little bit on that leadership question. I could share one other chapter, which is kind of a lighthearted one and kind of a nice one to end on, and then we could do more general questions. Should we try a lighthearted chapter as the last one? Does that sound reasonable? Okay, let's take a look at this one. I say lighthearted, you might think, really? Does Lao Tzu do lighthearted? So let me do this one. This chapter is all about what we experience on the other side of desire. You've likely gathered by now that desire can be the cause of a lot of confusion. So this happens to be chapter 44. And I like this one. It's, like I say, a little more lighthearted. Here goes Lao Tzu. Fame or integrity, which is more important? Money or happiness, which is more valuable? Success or failure, which is more destructive? If you look to others for fulfillment, you'll never truly be fulfilled. If your happiness depends on money, you'll never be happy with yourself. Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. So rejoice in the way things are. The path comes from the inside out. It does not go from the outside in. The path to peace, contentment, and serenity comes from being true to your inner self and being at one with the Tao. It is only ourself that would have us think the path goes from the outside in. In other words, that our satisfaction with life all depends on what happens in the outside world. So if we're not enjoying peace, contentment, and serenity, then there are a lot of things we need to do. For example, there are goals to be set and achieved. There are people who need to think well of us. There is money that needs to be stockpiled, and then, only then, will we be happy. It's no surprise that this isn't how it works. It's likely also no surprise that we seem to keep forgetting this. When will we learn? It's a good question. Let's see what we've learned so far by having a quiz. Fame or integrity? Which is more important? Fame is not the right answer. Fame is all about what others think of us. This is not where contentment comes from. Contentment is an inside job. It comes from accepting yourself. We may remember, quote, because he is content with himself, he doesn't need others' approval. That was chapter 30. Let's try another question. Money or happiness? Which is more valuable? This is an easy one. The answer is happiness. Good. Clearly we've learned something. Maybe we're remembering, quote, chase after money and security and your heart will never unclench. That was in chapter 9. Next, success or failure? Which is more destructive? Ooh, this is a trick question because the answer is yes. Success and failure are equally destructive because our tendency is to chase one and avoid the other and thereby fail to accept whatever is here right now. Did pretty well on the quiz. So let's explore the answers a little more. Why is fame less important than integrity? Because fame depends on what others think of you, not on your acceptance of yourself. Quote, if you look to others for fulfillment, you'll never truly be fulfilled. Why? Because chasing the approval of others is a never-ending game in which you're always at their mercy. We may recall, quote, care about people's approval and you'll be their prisoner. That was chapter 9. This is not the way to go. Next, if your happiness depends on money, you'll never be happy with yourself. Why? Because you've pinned your happiness on something outside yourself that you can never have enough of. It's another doomed approach. So what's the right way to go? The answer is simple. Turn around. Stop looking outside. Look inside. You're here. You've already arrived. There's nowhere you need to strive to get to. You don't need just a bit more money or just one more person's approval. Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. You don't need more, whatever more may consist of. You already have all you need. In fact, the moment you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. So if you want happiness and fulfillment, stop chasing after things in the outside world. Stop trying to possess things for yourself. Let go of them. And while you're at it, let go of yourself. Look what the master does. Quote, she's detached from all things. That's why she's one with them. Because she's let go of herself, she's perfectly fulfilled. That was chapter 7. Imagine what it would be like if we all did this. People would be content with their simple, everyday lives in harmony, free of desire. It's chapter 37. Try it and see. How often we look outside ourselves for fulfillment. We need other people to think well of us. We need to do things in the outside world to produce money. Would enough people think well of us? We have enough money, then only then will we be happy. At least that's what we think. You ever wondered exactly when this might be? What if the answer were never? Needs and desires are like a bottomless pit. However much you satisfy them, you'll always feel you're lacking. Others may promote you on the organizational ladder, but there's always one rung higher. You may have a fancy car or house or boat, any other material possession, but someone somewhere has a fancier one. This chapter reminds us the moment we're content with what we have, rejoice in the way things are, is the moment we realize there is nothing lacking. The moment we don't need things to belong to us is the moment the whole world belongs to us, as it were. Why? Because we're on the other side of desire. This is the place to dwell. So I hope that's given you a flavor of what the book's all about. I'm aware of time and that we should take questions or more general questions. I'll just say, in my experience, I find that whatever's on my mind, which is usually way more than needed, if I spend some time with the Tao Te Ching, I always end up seeing more clearly. It's back to having the patience to wait till the mud settles and the water's clear. So I hope this book does something similar for you. If you're familiar with the Tao, then I hope I've encouraged you to go back and spend more time with it. If you're not, then this book's a cool way to get not only the complete text, but also a guided journey to go with it. So with that, I should turn it over to Julie and any questions. And I'm sorry, I realize we probably only got about 5 minutes or so. But questions or thoughts or comments or anything that anyone would like to share?
Yeah, there's a little background noise at the store, so I apologize for that. But Kathleen had a question that kind of leads great from what you've just said. What was your process to write this interpretation of the Tao? Did you go outdoors a lot or have a special place to write?
Good question. Where I was actually sitting, I guess, is part of the process, I suppose. I didn't go outside because I like playing on my laptop. But my process was actually not to write a book. My process was to explore, why did I keep coming back to this thing again and again ever since I've been a teenager? And my process actually began with opening a Word document, and I keyed in one of Stephen Mitchell's chapters. Chapter 1, I keyed it in, and I thought, okay, I'll now explore for a page worth what I think's going on. And so I just wrote that really to find out. I find out what I think by writing. The words seem to click, and I go, oh, that's interesting. I guess that's what I think. And so I did that to sort of unbundle a chapter, and then I did that again for 3 or 4 or 5 chapters, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I did 10, and then I stopped. And then, of course, you kind of get into it. And the beauty of the Tao Te Ching is the structure's already there. There are 81 chapters, and when you get to the end of the last one, you're done. So I carried on and did a few more, and then I'd done 20 of them. And then I go, well, why didn't I carry on a bit longer? And so I did. And then I got to the end of that, and I thought, well, there we go. And then you're faced with that usual challenge, I guess, that any writer has, which is, what do I do now? And the answer is, I saw it really only 1 or 2 things. I leave it on the hard drive on my laptop. I die and my kids find it, and maybe they delete it. I don't know what they do. Or you try and get it out. So the minute I started thinking, well, how do I get it out? The first thing I have to do is contact Stephen Mitchell and say, hello, I just keyed your entire book inside of mine, and I'm going to put that book out there. What do you think of that? I wasn't quite that blunt, but of course, you can't do that. You can't take somebody else's. You can quote people's books, but like keying the entire book, if you're familiar with the Stephen Mitchell version, it's quite compact. It's quite short. It doesn't take long to key it all in. So I got in touch with him, and basically he liked the project. He said, you need to be in touch with HarperCollins because they own all the rights, and you'll have to figure things out with them. And so I did that, and it was a bit of a long journey, but it finally worked out, and we have ended up with this book where, as you know, there's a Stephen Mitchell page here, that exactly Stephen Mitchell's words. I'm not paraphrasing or anything. And then there's my guided journey in between. And you step through the book like that 81 times till you get to the end, and there's the book. So that was kind of the process. I don't know if that partly answers your question.
I think it does. I think that's really nice to think about too, that you started more as a personal writing project than to say,
Right.
I want to try and impose this on other people.
Good words, exactly. And as Kathleen mentioned, actually, just when we were starting, there are lots of translations of the Tao Te Ching out there. There are lots of versions with commentaries. In fact, I hadn't looked at most of them. I deliberately didn't early on because I wanted to know what I thought. And then when I got to the stage of, well, you now have to write a book proposal and try and interest an agent and editor and all that business, I started researching what else was out there. And I thought, oh my gosh, there are so many other books out there on the Tao Te Ching. How am I going to prove the world needs yet another one? So that became a whole interesting exercise.
So I guess speaking of that, Kathleen had one more question, and then the rest is just a few comments that I'll read. But
okay, sure.
She asks, who are similar Tao people, venerated philosophers or unknown persons, asking about actual names if people alive or in the past that you may know, or if possible, excuse me. So maybe other Kathleen, like other books similar to this where someone has kind of, you can unmute.
Yeah, unmute her, yeah. Kathleen.
Hold on, you got to press yours now.
Fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just thought it's interesting because thinking of, I mean, you must have perhaps run across people who aren't famous or who just carry this,
Right.
and maybe there is somebody else more well-known speaking of this as well. So it's just kind of a small curiosity about, do you know other Taoists?
Oh.
Maybe that's a question. I don't know.
Okay, without wanting to dodge the question, I have a difficulty with labels like Taoist, because I don't know if I consider myself one, because Taoism is a whole thing, and there's a
Yeah,
religion
you're not
in there.
supposed to name it either. So,
Oh, okay, all right. I just find myself very inspired by what this guy wrote a long time ago, and I kind of really don't make it any more complicated than that.
all
But are
right.
there other people, like alive or dead, were you suggesting?
Oh,
Who?
in the past, I mean, you certainly could have a sense of, if you meet somebody in a grocery store,
Oh,
or
I see.
uh, you know, in your profession or whatever, and all of
Yeah.
a sudden you're like, oh, that's a, I don't know. It's maybe not a formed question. It's just, I mean, there are others out there who
Yes.
express this in their way.
Yes. Yeah, I think I know what you mean. To use the image that I think works quite well, and that's why why it's on the front of the book. I think what Lao Tzu does is take us up a mountain and points at the view. He doesn't comment on it. He doesn't say it's right or wrong. He just says, "Look," and he shows you a view. And if you look at the Tao Te Ching as a whole, it's not full of. There are no 10 commandments in there. It's not thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do that. It's more neutral, almost like observations. If I had to summarize the whole book in a single quote of his, right near the end, he has a chapter that says, I have just 3 things to teach, which is kind of funny because he doesn't teach. It goes teaching without words, performing without actions. That's the master's way. So he doesn't people want to get hung up on his words. That's the whole point. He wants them to look at the view that he's pointing at. But he does have this chapter 67. He says, I have 3 things to teach: simplicity, patience, compassion. These 3 are your greatest treasures. And if you had to sum the entire book up in 3 words, I think it would be those. And I know personally for me, that provides a real anchor in a way when I feel I'm losing it or overcomplicating my world. I think of this simplicity thing because I'm a little analytical at times. My wife will certainly tell you that, and so will many of my friends. I tend to get into details a lot, and my water becomes quite muddy. And if I have the patience to wait and see what's really going on here, which is probably a lot simpler than what I think it is. Patience, because typically we want the world to be our way, the way we want it to be. And we want it now. We're almost like little kids with no patience. And compassion, I always think, is about meeting the world where it's coming from, not where you are. And if we don't check our mind, as it were, we tend to come at the world with ourselves at center stage, looking at all in terms of what we think people should be doing or the way a situation should be unfolding. And then we act to close this gap between our expectation and reality, forgetting that we're the ones that just created the gap by doing that. So I feel sometimes, to go back to Kathleen's point, there are folks who've been up the mountain with Lao Tzu or by some other means and can see that view. And when you hold that view inside you and you try and let your actions spring from being centered in the Tao rather than centered in yourself, that's when you get this flow or effortlessness that Lao Tzu refers to. I think Kathleen just disappeared.
I think maybe her internet cut out.
Oh, okay. That was a great question, though.
It is.
Anything from Sarah or Raymond?
So we just have a couple fun comments.
Yes.
Everyone agrees that they really like your voice, and
Oh,
Sarah says, I hope you did the audiobook
oh,
because
thank
your
you.
voice is great for this.
Thank
And
you.
then Raymond did have a comment that some of this sounds like Aristotle.
Oh, yes.
And then Kathleen mentioned Ursula Le Guin. She said,
Yes.
also took years to compose her interpretation, and it makes sense to keep discovering as you live your daily life. And
She
then
did.
Raymond mentioned that there is a podcast called What's the Tao All About with Dr. Carl Totten. Are you familiar
Oh,
with that?
yes. Actually, no, I'm not. Thank you for that. I will certainly go there and take a look. What I'd love to do is, because I realize I realize we're low on time. I was just going to share on my screen contact and how to reach me after this. But I get a little message saying the host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh,
So
yes.
maybe
Well,
we can't
I
do
can
that.
also we can put that up on our website on your
Oh,
event
okay.
page. We can definitely add your contact information, and this will go up on YouTube in the next couple
Oh,
of
okay.
days so people can
Yeah.
watch it. And I just want to remind everyone that we have the book, so come by and get a copy. And
Okay.
then if you ever do write another book, or perhaps we'll just do a second event on this one if we can have you in the store sometime.
Oh, I'd love to do that. In person is great, but I do have to say, you arranging events like this is awesome because it makes it for all of us. There's so little effort involved. It's really great. Thank you very much. And I should say thank you to two folks who aren't here today. And the first is Lao Tzu, who died 2,500 years ago. But also I need to give a big thank you to Stephen Mitchell, who's alive and well, because without those two guys, this book wouldn't even exist. And thank you to everybody who came tonight, because sharing the ideas in the end of the day, that's what it's all about. And books and words are just a cool way to do that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for joining us from across the border. And
You're welcome.
we wish you good health and stay well. And to everyone else as well, please stay well. There's an election next week, and we're gonna get through it no matter what happens.
Yeah.
And the store will stay open, so please come and see us. And I think that is the end of our evening tonight.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you so much, everyone.